This is New Patreon Series number 60. This is part of the group of presentations I'm making called Unraveling Yeshua's Hard Sayings. In this one, we're going to look at this statement. Anyone who divorces his wife except on the ground of adultery causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman divorced for adultery also commits adultery. Now, where does this saying occur? Well, the saying is transmitted in Mark 10, but is repeated with redactions and somewhat softening redactions in Matthew 19 and Luke 16. There are many other sayings and stories about adultery and divorce that can be found in several other places. For example, Matthew 5, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Another place, some Pharisees came, and this is in Mark 10 and Matthew 19, and asked him to test him, and they asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? He answered them, what did Moses command you? And they said, Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her. But Jesus said to them, because of your hardness of heart, he wrote this commandment for you. But from the beginning of the worlds, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. You know the commandments. You shall not commit adultery. And the word there is moikia in Greek. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony. And you shall honor your father and your mother. This is found in Luke 18. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, which is now called porneia in Greek. Theft, murder, adultery, that's moikia in Greek. Greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. And all these evils come from inside and defile a person. That is in Mark 7 with its various parallels. Well, the question is it authentic? The saying about adultery, the saying about divorce, it meets the test of multiple sources and variations on it occur in the Gospels, epistles, and early church fathers. And there is no doubt among scholars, including me, that Yeshua opposed adultery and divorce in his day. This is a good book that you can read about all the issues here by Heth and Wenham. Divorce was a living debate in Yeshua's era. For example, Hillel and Shammai gave opposite rulings. Beit Shammai held that a man may only divorce his wife for a serious transgression, but Beit Hillel allowed divorce for even trivial offenses, such as burning a meal. You can find that in Wikipedia under Hillel and Shammai. But we need to understand two terms here. Greek porneia meant fornication and all forms of illicit and perverse sexual activity. But the Hebrew and Aramaic words it translated in the Septuagint meant fornication or prostitution. Porne was a female prostitute, and a pornos was a male prostitute in Greek, with another word from the same root in Aramaic. The more specific Greek term here would be mokia, which Jesus is represented as using in Greek Matthew. The Greek New Testament word divorce, apoluo, meant to release, dismiss, abandon, divorce, and euphemistically to put away, and the Aramaic word meant essentially the same thing. Now, there were Christian attempts to soften the ruling as time passed. The ruling on divorce is made by Jesus at Luke 6:16 and Mark 10. However, neither of those two make an exception for porneia. Paul of Tarsus quotes Jesus when he says, "Not I, but the Lord," in 1 Corinthians 7:10, with no exceptions granted, although he, Paul, I and not the Lord, goes on to give exceptions. Matthew 19 discusses the same issue and does include the same exception for porneia. Now we have a pericope about the woman taken in adultery in John 8 that says this: Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" And she said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go on your way, and from now on do not sin again." Well, the pericope is not found in any place in any of the earliest surviving Greek Gospel manuscripts, neither in the two 3rd century papyrus witnesses to John, Papyrus 66 and Papyrus 75, nor in the 4th century Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. You can check that out in Wikipedia. In other words, it is not accepted by most scholars, including me, as historical. The woman taken in adultery is a very popular theme, but it is not really something that probably Jesus said. The Church Fathers, however, unanimously opposed divorce except for porneia or mokia. Now, this exception, the business of making exceptions, started probably about 80 or 90 with Matthew, and in John we find the woman taken in adultery as sort of backing up this softening of the approach towards this. But the Church Fathers unanimously opposed divorce except for the exceptions of porneia or mokia, and they did not allow remarriage unless divorced spouses had died. This strict attitude is still upheld in Catholicism. The medieval St. Thomas More, in his Utopia, suggested if a husband and wife could not live in harmony by mutual consent of both, they should be allowed to divorce and marry someone else. So the softening happened in Protestantism quite early. And other professional Protestant reformers like Erasmus, Calvin, Luther, Tyndale, and Cranmer, who wrote the Church of England prayer book, held that marriage was a civil matter, not a church matter, and allowed divorce and even remarriage in certain cases. Now, Knox, Milton, and Wesley adopted Cranmer's Anglican view, and today the Vatican itself has revisited what Pope Francis called its punishing rules on divorce, since most Christian denominations have already done this. Now, why Yeshua's ruling, like Shammai's, was strict, we want to look at this. Why was it so strict? In the 1st century, Jewish divorce was done by the husband writing a legal document and publicly declaring he was no longer married. He took custody of the children, and the ex-wife was forced to fend for herself unless the contract or her ketubah provided for restitution or support. Often relatives would not welcome her back, and her only options for support were prostitution or servitude, to become a slave. Now, Yeshua's ruling protected women from unjust divorce conventions and penalties. Even though there were provisions for a wife to demand a divorce from her husband in cases of extreme cruelty or lack of support, they were very difficult to enforce because only the husband could initiate divorce. Yeshua's ruling was even more rigid than that of Shammai, who prohibited only priests or kohanim from marriage to divorced women. Yeshua, however, applied the priestly exclusion to all men. Whoever marries a woman divorced for adultery also commits adultery. Now, this no longer applies to modern life. There are several rulings that Yeshua made that were appropriate in his day, but are not appropriate today. Divorce is a far different institution in the 21st century than it was in first century Judaism. Women can initiate divorce. Community property, common law rulings, and courts protect women and usually grant them child custody, alimony, and child support. Women who are abused or abandoned can initiate divorce proceedings, and women have means of self-support as well. So they represent almost half of the labor force in many nations, and also modern divorce is often done by mutual agreement rather than spousal abandonment. So many women are working in the labor force, earning incomes, they can fend for themselves, plus they get a lot of protection from modern laws. To consider Yeshua's ruling of nearly 2,000 years ago for Jews of that era to be literally binding today is wrong, in my opinion. The meaning today, I would say, of Yeshua's words is a spouse who divorces for selfish or trivial reasons and turns away from his or her family has gravely violated trust and incurs severe moral consequences, or chumah, we call them. But divorce and remarriage for significant reasons, I say, does not incur moral consequences today.